Far to the east, beyond the mountains of the Black Sea, small groups of humans move slowly toward new horizons. They are Homo sapiens, carrying stone blades, fire-making tools, and memories of warmer lands. It is around 45,000 years ago. The Earth is locked in the deep rhythms of the Ice Age. Great ice sheets cover much of the north, while steppe and tundra stretch across the continent. The journey ahead is long. Every step brings them into colder climates, new landscapes, and into the presence of another humankind. The European continent is already inhabited. Neanderthals have lived there for hundreds of thousands of years. They have adapted bodies, broad chests, and strong limbs, suited for the cold. Their stone tools, simple but effective, have served them well for generations. Now, however, the newcomers arrive, with lighter frames, different technologies, and new ways of living. For many millennia, the two species will overlap. Traces of their encounters remain in the soil and in our genomes today. The landscape they enter is immense. From the Carpathian Basin to the valleys of the Danube, open plains dominate the horizon. Herds of reindeer move in endless lines. Bison scatter when wolves approach. Mammoths roam slowly, tusks curved like white crescents against the frost. For humans, these animals are both challenge and promise. They are food, clothing, shelter, and tools. To approach them requires patience and planning. Hunting one mammoth may sustain a group for months, yet failure could mean starvation. Cold defines every moment. Winters last long, with biting winds sweeping over the plains. Even in summer, nights are chilled. Fire is not a luxury, it is survival. Ash deposits, found in caves and shelters across Europe, reveal how often fires were kept alive. At times, the embers smouldered for days, carefully fed with twigs and bone. Archaeologists note that keeping fire burning may have been easier than starting it anew. A hearth in the darkness is not only warmth, but also protection from predators. The arrival of Homo sapiens leaves marks in the archaeological record. Blade tools appear, longer and sharper than the flake tools of the Neanderthals. Ornaments of shell and bone begin to spread far from coasts and rivers. Some beads, found deep inland, suggest networks of exchange, and they may have passed from hand to hand across hundreds of kilometers, linking distant groups into fragile chains of contact. This detail, quiet and small, reminds us that Ice Age survival was never only about food. It was also about knowledge, sharing, belonging. Still, mysteries remain. Why did Homo sapiens move into Europe at this precise time? Some researchers believe climate fluctuations opened new corridors, where grasslands replaced forests. Others think growing populations in the Near East pushed groups outward in search of game. Perhaps curiosity played a role. The simple pressure of life at the edge of known lands. The truth is uncertain. What is clear is that this step reshaped the future. Without it, Europe would have remained the realm of Neanderthals alone. On a planetary scale, the setting is dramatic. Vast ice sheets cover Scandinavia and northern Germany. Sea levels are far lower than today, exposing broad plains along the Atlantic coast. Rivers follow courses unfamiliar to us, altered by ice and meltwater. The Earth's orbit shifts subtly, affecting sunlight and seasons. Glaciers grow, then shrink, in slow rhythms of tens of thousands of years. Against this immense backdrop, the movement of a few thousand humans seems small. Yet these steps alter the trajectory of humanity itself. The first encounters with Neanderthals are difficult to reconstruct. Evidence lies scattered. Stone tools in layered sediments, a tooth in a cave, fragments of bone in deep strata. Genetic studies reveal interbreeding. Some Homo sapiens carried Neanderthal DNA, which remains in people today. But whether these meetings were peaceful exchanges or tense rivalries is unknown. Both possibilities may have occurred at different times and places. The shared record is silent. What survives is only the mixture of bloodlines and the disappearance of Neanderthals within a few thousand years. Survival required constant adaptation. Hunters followed migrating herds across vast distances. Camps were temporary, shifting with the seasons. Caves offered shelter. But when none were near, groups built windbreaks from branches and hides. Some sites preserve the remains of such dwellings, circles of stones that once held down walls of skin, hearths at their centers, blackened with soot. These fragile traces, buried for millennia, testify to ingenuity in the face of cold. Water was another concern. Rivers froze, springs vanished beneath snow. Yet glaciers themselves offered a resource. Meltwater trickled at their edges, cold but drinkable. In summer, thawing permafrost left wetlands filled with birds and fish. The rhythm of the year was not only harsh but also generous, if understood well. Those who survived were those who learned to read the signs, tracks in snow, the call of migrating geese, the sudden thaw of ice on a lake. One lesser-known discovery is the presence of ochre at many early sites. This red mineral, ground into powder, may have been used for decoration, for tanning hides, or for symbolic purposes. In some caves, traces of ochre accompany burials, hinting at rituals or beliefs carried across continents. Even in the struggle against cold, humans invested time in meaning. The making of color suggests an inner life, not limited to survival alone. Mysteries continue to challenge scholars. Some argue that early Homo sapiens entered Europe in small waves that vanished, leaving little trace. Others believe a continuous expansion took place, slowly filling the continent. The record is incomplete. Layers of sediment are disturbed, bones rare, radiocarbon, dates uncertain. Yet the outline grows clearer with every discovery. Modern humans arrived, lived alongside Neanderthals, and eventually remained while the others faded. Step by step, the newcomers learn the rhythm of Europe's ice age. They discover which valleys shelter game, which caves hold warmth, which stones flake into sharp blades. They pass this knowledge through generations. Children grow within the sound of wind against hide walls, within the glow of fire against stone. By the time centuries pass, the presence of Homo sapiens is no longer a novelty. It is the foundation of a new human story in Europe. The world they enter is vast, fragile, and dangerous, yet it is also full of possibility. From the mountains of the Balkans to the frozen plains of France, survival demands adaptation. This adaptation, technological, social, and symbolic, marks the beginning of a long journey. Across the next tens of thousands of years, these small groups will endure glacial advances, sudden thaws, floods, and droughts. They will leave behind bones, beads, and painted walls. And slowly, the continent will shift from being shared with another humankind to being theirs alone. The first footsteps on Europe's cold frontiers echo far beyond their time. They open the door to everything that follows: shelters of bone, fires in the darkness, networks of exchange, and, eventually, the roots of the societies we inherit today. In the silence of that frozen age, the story of human Europe begins. Across the vast plains of Ice Age Europe, an endless grassland stretches from horizon to horizon. This is the mammoth steppe, one of the richest ecosystems ever to exist on Earth. For tens of thousands of years, it covers much of the northern hemisphere, from Spain across Siberia to Alaska. In this immense expanse, cold winds sweep over open ground, carrying the scent of snow and the sound of countless hooves. It is here that early humans must find their place, learning the rhythm of life among great herds and formidable predators. The steppe is shaped by the cold. Summers are short, winters are long, and forests are scarce. Grasses and herbs dominate, resilient to frost and wind. These plants sustain immense herds of grazing animals. Woolly mammoths wander slowly across valleys, their curved tusks tracing wide arcs in the air. Reindeer migrate in vast lines, their hooves drumming against frozen soil. Horses, bison, and woolly rhinoceroses graze side by side, each adapted to the severe climate. For hunters, this abundance is both opportunity and test. The animals provide food, hides, bones, and sinew, but only if captured through skill and endurance. Archaeological traces show how humans adapted to these conditions. Stone points, finely crafted, reveal knowledge of long hunts. Sites littered with broken bones suggest coordinated efforts, where groups work together to drive animals into traps or toward natural barriers. In some places, piles of mammoth bones hint at repeated visits, perhaps seasonal gatherings where communities hunted, feasted, and prepared for winter. To take down such giants required planning beyond the individual. Cooperation became as essential as strength. Among the most striking finds is a site in Moravia, where circles of mammoth bones once formed the walls of dwellings. These structures, built from skulls, tusks, and leg bones, were covered with hides to keep out the wind. Inside, fires burned steadily. The remains suggest not just temporary shelters, but planned, long-term habitation. For people of the mammoth steppe, the bones of the very animals they hunted became part of their architecture, a merging of life and survival written into every wall. Life on the steppe also demanded mobility. Herds moved with the seasons, following pastures across hundreds of kilometers. Humans followed in turn, carrying tools, children, and knowledge from camp to camp. The distances were immense, longer than modern nations span. A family might travel farther than the distance from Paris to Moscow in a lifetime, yet always within the same unbroken grassland. The ability to move, to know where the herds would be, was the key to survival. Still, mysteries remain. How did humans communicate across such wide lands? Did distant groups meet regularly, or did they remain isolated? Beads of Mediterranean shells found far inland suggest long-distance contact. But whether through trade networks or through slow migrations is debated. Perhaps groups met seasonally, exchanging ornaments, flint, and stories before parting again into the endless plains. These questions remain unanswered, resting in the gaps of the archaeological record. On the planetary scale, the mammoth steppe represents an ecological wonder. Despite its cold, it sustains more biomass than many tropical forests today. The combination of rich grasses, cold-adapted animals, and vast space creates a web of life that endures for millennia. Predators thrive as well. Lions, larger than those of Africa, cave hyenas with powerful jaws, and saber-toothed cats patrol the plains. For humans, Fire and cooperation are the only defenses. Nights on the open ground demand vigilance, for the glow of eyes may appear just beyond the firelight. One lesser-known detail emerges from small finds, fragments of bird bones carefully worked into flutes. At sites in Central Europe, such instruments survive from more than 35,000 years ago. In the heart of the steppe, humans made music. The sound of flutes echoing against open valleys reminds us that even amid survival, people sought rhythm and melody. Music may have served to strengthen group bonds, to pass time during long winters, or perhaps to echo the calls of animals they hunted. These fragile instruments connect us to the inner lives of Ice Age people. Yet the challenges were relentless. Blizzards could strip warmth from bodies in minutes. Rivers froze, making crossings treacherous. The very herds that sustained life could vanish for a season, leaving hunger in their absence. Archaeologists find campsites where bones of small animals, hares and birds, dominate, suggesting years of scarcity. Survival was never guaranteed. Each winter was a test, and each summer a fragile reprieve. The Mammoth Steppe also linked continents. During periods of low sea level, land bridges connected Europe, Asia, and even North America. Animals moved across these corridors, and perhaps humans too. The vastness of the steppe meant that boundaries we know today between continents, between regions, did not exist. It was one world, open and cold, bound by grass and ice. For those who walked it, distances that seem impossible to us were part of daily reality. Mystery lingers in the fate of the Mammoth Steppe itself. For tens of thousands of years it endured, only to vanish with the end of the Ice Age. As glaciers melted, forests returned, and the rich grasslands retreated. Animals that had thrived there dwindled, some into extinction. Was it climate alone that ended this world? Or did human hunting play a role? Scholars continue to debate, sifting through bones and sediments for answers. Step by step, humans learned to live within this vast system. They timed hunts to migrations, built dwellings from the bones of giants, and carried fire across frozen valleys. They created art, ornaments, and music, even as they faced hunger and cold. The Mammoth Steppe shaped them as much as they shaped it. Each adaptation became part of the long journey of survival in Ice Age Europe. In the stillness of the steppe, under skies heavy with clouds, the rhythm of life continued, herds moved, predators followed, and humans walked among them, fragile yet enduring. The story of these plains is not only of survival, but also of resilience, cooperation, and creativity. Here, in the shadows of mammoths and bison, humanity found the skills and spirit to endure an unforgiving world. In the valleys of Ice Age Europe, two human kinds coexist for hundreds of thousands of years. Neanderthals have thrived here. They are strong, broad-bodied, and adapted to cold. Their bones and tools lie in caves from Spain to Siberia. But around 45,000 years ago, another presence appears. Homo sapiens step onto the same lands, bringing new technologies, ornaments, and ways of life. For a brief window in deep time, the two species overlap. This twilight period marks one of the most intriguing chapters in prehistory. Archaeological evidence shows traces of contact. In some caves, layers of Neanderthal occupation lie just below those of modern humans. Stone tools change from the classic Neanderthal style, called Mousterian, to the finer blades of Homo sapiens. Yet in a few places, hybrid industries appear. These transitional tools combine elements of both traditions. Some scholars argue they reflect cultural borrowing. Neanderthals copying new methods from their neighbors. Others suggest they are the independent inventions of Neanderthals themselves, sparked by new pressures. The truth remains debated. Genetics provides clearer proof of interaction. Modern humans today carry fragments of Neanderthal DNA, around 1 to 2% on average. These traces are more than symbolic. They affect immune systems, hair, and even susceptibility to certain diseases. Interbreeding happened multiple times across different regions, whether through cooperation, exchange, or occasional conflict. The two groups met closely enough to merge their lineages. The legacy of those meetings endures in our bodies. Yet within a few thousand years, Neanderthals vanish. Their disappearance is one of the great mysteries of human history. Climate change played a role. The Ice Age was unstable, with sudden cold snaps and thaws disrupting ecosystems. Prey animals shifted range, forcing constant adaptation. Neanderthals may have struggled with these rapid changes, but competition with Homo sapiens is also likely. The newcomers brought longer-range weapons, more complex social network, perhaps faster rates of cultural innovation. Over time, small disadvantages may have compounded into extinction. On a planetary scale, these events unfold as glaciers expand and retreat. Sea levels fall, exposing land bridges. Environments change in cycles of thousands of years. Against this backdrop, the loss of Neanderthals is a single thread in a vast tapestry of change. Still, for Europe, it marks a turning point. The continent shifts from being home to two human species to being shaped solely by one. One lesser-known detail comes from caves in France and Spain, where evidence suggests Neanderthals may have created art. In La Pasiega cave, red markings on the walls have been dated to over 64,000 years ago, long before Homo sapiens arrived in Europe. If confirmed, it means Neanderthals painted symbols, perhaps with meaning beyond survival. This challenges older views of them as purely practical beings. Instead, they may have shared in the symbolic worlds often attributed only to modern humans. Mysteries remain abundant. Did Neanderthals and Homo sapiens exchange language? Were there shared rituals or only fleeting encounters? Some burials attributed to Neanderthals contain grave goods, like tools and animal bones, but interpretations differ. Were these true ritual or practical ways of protecting bodies from predators? The evidence is sparse, leaving space for multiple possibilities. What is certain is that Neanderthals were not simple or inferior. They were humans in their own right, with rich adaptations to Ice Age Europe. In some region, Neanderthals held on longer. Gibraltar's caves preserve their remains from as late as 30,000 years ago, suggesting isolated refugees. These last groups lived at the edge of a changing world, surrounded by Homo sapiens expanding across the continent. The meeting of the two kinds was not uniform. In some valleys, Neanderthals may have vanished before ever seeing modern humans. In others, the overlap lasted centuries. The patchwork nature of survival and extinction makes the story complex. Step by step, Homo sapiens spread wider. Their ornaments, blades, and beads appear in layers once dominated by Neanderthal tools. Their footprints, sometimes preserved in ancient mud, reveal families walking together. With each generation, the balance shifted. By the time glaciers reached their greatest extent, Neanderthals were gone. The twilight had ended, leaving memory only in bones, stones, and genes. This period holds lessons about the fragility of human life. A species that endured for hundreds of thousands of years disappeared in the span of a few millennia. The reasons may be multiple: climate instability, limited population sizes, competition with newcomers, or simple chance. Their story reminds us that survival is never guaranteed, even for those well adapted to their environments. Archaeologists continue to uncover new evidence: a tooth in a cave, a fragment of genome, a scatter of blades, all add pieces to the puzzle. Each discovery reshapes understanding. Perhaps the twilight of the Neanderthals was not only decline but also transformation, as parts of them lived on in us. Their disappearance is real, but their presence endures in ways subtle and profound. In the quiet of Europe's Ice Age valleys, the two humankinds once walked side by side. They watched the same stars, lit the same fires, and hunted the same herds. For a moment in deep time, they shared the world. Then, one faded, and the other remained. This twilight, both ending and beginning, set the course for the human story in Europe that follows. Amid the cold winds of the Ice Age, survival depended not only on fire and hunting, but also on the ability to create shelter. Across the wide plains of Europe, where trees were scarce and caves not always available, humans turned to other materials. They shaped bones, hides, and stones into walls and roofs. The result was some of the earliest planned architecture in human history. These shelters, fragile to our eyes, carried whole families through the bitter winters of the Pleistocene. The most famous examples come from Central and Eastern Europe, where mammoth bones were used as building material. Archaeologists have uncovered circular dwellings, sometimes more than 6 meters wide, built from skulls, tusks, and long bones carefully arranged. These structures were covered with hides and anchored with stones. Inside, hearths glowed, smoke rising through openings in the roofs. The choice of mammoth bones was not random. These animals were hunted in large numbers, and their remains provided sturdy frameworks when wood was scarce. For groups living far from forests, the bones of the very creatures they pursued became the pillars of their homes. The effort required to build such dwellings speaks of cooperation. Gathering dozens of mammoth bones, transporting them, and arranging them into circles demanded many hands. Some sites contain evidence of repeated use, with layers of ash and discarded tools suggesting long-term habitation. These were not simple windbreaks built for a night or two. They were planned spaces, designed to last through seasons of cold. For archaeologists, this reveals a new dimension of Ice Age life, not only the constant movement of nomadic groups, but also the possibility of semi-permanent bases. Still, caves remained vital. In limestone regions of France and Spain, groups sheltered in caverns, their walls etched with soot from fires. Some caves were shallow, used mainly for protection from storms. Others stretched deep, providing stable temperatures year-round. Within these spaces, humans left traces of daily life: hearths, stone tool, fragments of bone. In certain caves, painted walls suggest that these shelters were also places of meaning, blending survival with symbolic expression. The line between dwelling and sanctuary was not always clear. One lesser-known detail emerges from the arrangement of hearths inside shelters. In some mammoth bone houses, several fire pits were found, placed at specific distances. This may suggest the division of space within the dwelling, separate areas for tasks, sleeping, or storing food. Such organization hints at social structures carried into the architecture. The placement of fire was central, not only for warmth, but also as the anchor of domestic life. Around flames, people cooked, made tools, and told stories. The shelter became more than a wall against the wind. It was the heart of community. On the planetary scale, the need for such shelters was shaped by glaciers. At the height of the Ice Age, ice sheets extended across northern Europe, lowering sea levels and chilling climates even in the south. Open plains stretched for thousands of kilometers with little forest cover. Winds swept unhindered, carrying snow far and wide. To endure in such conditions, humans had to innovate. The shelters of bone and stone are answers written into the landscape, shaped by the global reach of ice. Mysteries remain about these dwellings. Some sites reveal enormous accumulations of bones, far more than a single group could have hunted. Were these bones collected over generations? Were they gathered from natural deaths? Or did groups store them deliberately for construction? Scholars continue to debate. The exact purpose of certain structures is also uncertain. Were they homes, meeting places, or even ritual spaces? The line between practical and symbolic use is often blurred in the archaeological record. The shelters themselves were not uniform. In some regions, simpler windbreaks of branches and hides sufficed. Stones were piled into low walls, hides stretched across them, weighted by bones. Elsewhere, pits were dug into the ground, with roofs of branches and sod above. These sunken dwellings offered insulation against the cold. The diversity of forms reflects adaptation to local conditions, resourcefulness applied to whatever materials were available. Another fascinating discovery comes from storage pits found near some shelters. These pits, sometimes lined with stone, may have been used to keep meat frozen during winter. In the permafrost, food could last for months, sustaining groups when hunting failed. Such planning shows foresight, a recognition of seasonal cycles and the risks of scarcity. Architecture, in this sense, extended beyond walls to include systems of storage and resource management. Step by step, these innovations shape the human relationship with the environment. To build a shelter was to claim a space against the vastness of the steppe. It allowed stability in a world defined by movement. Families could return to the same spot season after season, reusing structures and re-establishing camp. Over generations, this rhythm created nodes of human presence across the landscape, places where memory and habit gathered. The story of Ice Age shelters also highlights resilience. To modernize, a house of bones may seem fragile. Yet in the context of the mammoth steppe, it was an ingenious solution, crafted from what the environment offered. Each dwelling is testimony to the creativity of people who refused to yield to cold. They shaped the world with hands and minds, turning death into protection and survival into community. Archaeologists continue to study these remains, piecing together patterns of life. Burned bones reveal what was eaten, discarded flakes show how tools were made, and the soot on walls marks where fires once burned. Every detail, however small, adds to the picture of human ingenuity. Though fragile, the shelters speak loudly across tens of thousands of years. In the stillness of glacial Europe, bone houses rose against the wind, caves glowed with fire, and families gathered inside. Each structure was more than protection. It was the center of life in a harsh world. The ingenuity of these shelters ensured survival, carried knowledge forward, and laid the groundwork for future human societies. In the long winters of the Ice Age, when darkness stretched for months and winds swept across the frozen plains, one element defined survival more than any other: fire. To control fire was to endure, to create warmth where the world was cold, to bring light into caves and shelters, and to shape food into nourishment. Without it, the expansion of humans into Ice Age Europe would not have been possible. Archaeological evidence scattered across caves, open camps, and bone dwellings shows just how central fire was to daily life. Ash layers found deep inside caves tell part of the story. In sites like Grotte du Renne in France and Kostenki in Russia, repeated fires left thick deposits of charcoal and burned bone. These layers reveal that humans returned again and again, keeping hearths alive for days or weeks. Fire was rarely something created anew. Instead, it was tended, preserved, and carried. A glowing ember could be transferred from one site to another in a shell, a bone, or a piece of wood. To lose fire was to face hunger and frost, so communities guarded it carefully. The uses of fire were many. First was warmth, in shelters made of bone and hide, or in caves with damp walls. Heat from flames was the difference between life and death. Archaeologists studying hearth remains note how stones were placed around the edges, absorbing and radiating heat long after flames burned down. This simple technique extended the usefulness of fire through the night, keeping families warm as winds howled outside. Second was cooking. Bones of animals found at Ice Age camps often bear marks of burning. Meat roasted over flames or boiled in hides placed near embers was safer to eat and easier to digest. Cooking released more calories, allowing humans to thrive even on lean diets. Some bones show marrow extracted after heating, a practice that made the most of every animal. Fire transformed raw flesh into meals that sustained bodies through endless cold. Third was light. Deep in caves, torches made from resinous wood or animal fat provided illumination. The flickering glow revealed chambers where art was painted on walls. Without fire, such symbolic expression would not have been possible. The caves of Chauvet, Altamira, and Lascaux carry not only the images of animals but also the soot of lamps and torches that lit the way. Fire, in this sense, was not just survival but also a doorway to meaning and creativity. One lesser-known detail comes from burned bones used as fuel. In regions where wood was scarce, humans turned to mammoth and reindeer bones, rich in fat, which burned slowly when ignited. Archaeologists at sites in Ukraine and Siberia have found piles of calcined bones, evidence of this practice. To modern minds, firewood seems natural. But on the treeless mammoth steppe, bones themselves became part of the fire. It is a striking reminder of how resourceful Ice Age humans were, using every material the environment offered. Fire also provided protection. The mammoth steppe was home to predators, cave lions, hyenas, wolves. A circle of fire at night created safety. Flames and smoke deterred animals from approaching too closely. The psychological comfort of fire cannot be measured, but in the silence of the steppe, surrounded by darkness, it must have offered reassurance. Archaeologists note that many campsites are arranged with central hearths around which people slept, worked, and gathered. Fire was both shield and center. On the planetary scale, the mastery of fire had profound consequences. As glaciers locked vast amounts of water into ice, sea levels fell, and climates across Europe grew harsh. Without fire, human range would have been limited to milder regions. With fire, people spread into higher latitudes, enduring cold nights and short days. The presence of hearths across Europe shows that Homo sapiens carried this technology wherever they went, turning inhospitable lands into habitable zones. Fire was humanity's first great tool for reshaping the boundaries of the possible. Still, mysteries remain. How exactly did Ice Age humans ignite flames? Evidence of fire-starting tools is rare. Some archaeologists suggest the use of pyrite struck against flint to create sparks. Others argue that friction methods, using wooden drills, may have been known. But most fires seem to have been maintained rather than recreated. The question of invention versus preservation lingers. Did humans in Ice Age Europe ever sit in darkness, desperately trying to spark flame from stone and steel-like minerals? Or did they guard embers so carefully that such moments were rare? The record is silent. Fire also shaped social life. Around flames, people gathered. The glow of fire created a natural circle, defining community space. Here, tools were made, hides were stitched, food was shared. Some scholars suggest that language itself may have deepened around the hearth, as night offered time for stories and planning. Whether true or not, the association between fire and communication runs deep in human history. Firelight extended the day, allowing hours for thought and connection. Evidence from ash deposits reveals something else: the continuity of knowledge. Children must have learned from elders how to tend fire, how to feed it with the right fuel, how to keep embers alive through storms. This transmission of skill was as vital as hunting techniques. A single mistake could extinguish the flames, forcing groups into cold and hunger. Fire, therefore, was not only a physical tool but also a cultural inheritance, passed from hand to hand across generations. Another intriguing discovery comes from residues of resins and tars found near hearths. These substances, produced by heating birch bark in controlled conditions, were used as adhesives to fix stone blades onto wooden handles. Fire enabled this innovation, transforming raw materials into composite tools. The technology of hafting, crucial for efficient hunting, depended on controlled heat. In this sense, fire was not only for warmth and food, but also a driver of technological progress. Step by step, fire became inseparable from human identity. To master flame was to become something different from all other creatures on the steppe. Wolves had teeth, mammoths had size, but humans had fire. It leveled the balance of power, allowing fragile bodies to endure in a hostile world. Each hearth, glowing against the dark, was a declaration. Here, humans endure. Here, they create warmth where the earth gives none. Yet the fragility of this mastery should not be forgotten. Embers could die in heavy rain. Winds could scatter sparks. In the vastness of the Ice Age, even the most skilled groups were vulnerable. To light, tend, and protect fire was a constant task, never complete. The endurance of humanity in Europe depended on this vigilance as much as on hunting skill or clothing. In the silence of glacial nights, when auroras shimmered above the plains and herds lay sleeping in the dark, fire crackled at the heart of human shelters. Its smoke curled into the sky, carrying heat, light, and the memory of countless meals. Around it, communities rested, planned, and imagined. Fire was not only a tool, it was the center of life, the quiet flame that made survival possible in the cold heart of the Ice Age. Across the frozen plains of Ice Age Europe, survival was not only about fire, hunting, and shelter, it was also about clothing. The cold was merciless. Without proper protection, frost could bite through skin in minutes, and winds could strip warmth from even the strongest body. To endure, humans needed more than hides draped over shoulders. They needed garments that fitted tightly, layered carefully, and sewn with precision. The invention of the needle and thread transformed life in the north, allowing people to dress for survival in the coldest climates on Earth. Archaeological discoveries reveal just how early this technology emerged. In sites such as Kostenki in Russia and Dolny Vestanits in Moravia, bone needles with drilled eyes have been found, dating back more than 30,000 years. These small tools, carved from the bones of birds or mammals, are evidence of tailored clothing. With them, humans stitched hides together, fastening them with sinew threads. The result was more than a covering. It was clothing shaped to the body, sealed against wind, layered for insulation. Neanderthals also wore hides, as shown by wear patterns on their tools, but most evidence suggests their garments were simple wraps, tied or pinned, not tailored. Homo sapiens brought something new, true sewing. This innovation allowed garments to be shaped for arms, legs, and heads. With fitted clothing, humans could move freely, hunt efficiently, and endure colder conditions. The spread of bone needles in the archaeological record marks one of the quiet revolutions of Ice Age survival. The materials were diverse. Reindeer hides provided warmth and flexibility. Mammoth hides, though heavy, were durable for outer coverings. Sinew, stripped from the tendons of animals, served as thread. Awls and scrapers prepared the hides, softening them for wear. Archaeologists find many of these tools at habitation sites, suggesting that clothing making was a constant task. Each winter required repairs, replacements, and the passing down of skills. One lesser-known detail comes from the discovery of decorated clothing. Beads of ivory, shell, and stone have been found sewn onto garments. At Sunghir in Russia, burials more than 30,000 years old contained thousands of beads carefully arranged along the lines of clothing. To produce such decoration required immense labor, weeks or months of crafting. This shows that clothing was not only practical, but also symbolic. It carried meaning, identity, and perhaps status. Even in the harshest climates, people adorned themselves with beauty. The planetary scale of the Ice Age explains why such clothing was necessary. As glaciers expanded, climates across Europe grew drier and colder. Vast areas were treeless, windswept, and exposed. In these environments, even fire could not fully shield the body from cold when moving across the open steppe. Proper garments were the only way to survive long hunts, migrations, and sudden storms. Without them, human expansion into high latitudes would not have been possible. Still, mysteries remain. No actual garments from this early period have survived. Hides decay quickly, leaving only the tools and ornaments behind. Reconstructions of Ice Age clothing are based on indirect evidence: bone needles, beads, burials, and wear on tools. Some scholars suggest that garments may have been layered like modern parkas, with inner furs turned inward for insulation and outer hides facing outward for durability. Others propose hooded cloaks, boots, and mittens, but the precise forms remain unknown. What is clear is that humans adapted clothing far beyond simple wraps, creating tailored systems for protection. The importance of clothing extended beyond warmth. It enabled mobility. Hunters could pursue reindeer across icy plains without succumbing to frostbite. Families could migrate between camps, carrying infants and supplies, while wrapped in protective garments. Tailored clothing expanded the human range, turning previously inhospitable zones into habitable spaces. This, in turn, shaped migration routes, population growth, and the spread of cultural traditions. Another intriguing aspect is the role of clothing in social identity. Beads sewn onto garments created patterns visible from a distance. These may have signaled group membership, status, or personal identity. In a world where encounters with strangers were rare but significant, such signals mattered. A decorated coat might show who belonged to a group, who had alliances, or who carried symbolic roles. Clothing thus served as both shield and message. Fire and clothing worked together. Fire provided warmth in stationary camp, but clothing extended survival into the wider world. The two technologies complemented one another, creating a synergy that allowed humans to flourish. Archaeologists often find evidence of both: hearths surrounded by tools for hide preparation, ash layers mixed with bone needles. These associations tell a story of daily life, where making clothing was as constant as tending flames. On cold nights, sewing may have taken place by firelight. Needles of bone, polished smooth, passed through softened hides. Threads of sinew were pulled tight, knots secured. The rhythmic act of stitching linked generations, as skills were taught and repeated. To master sewing was as vital as mastering hunting. A skilled tailor could save lives as surely as a skilled hunter. Knowledge of stitching, layering, and repair became part of cultural inheritance. One unresolved mystery concerns the origins of footwear. Some archaeologists suggest that soft boots made from hides may have been common, necessary for movement across ice and snow. Wear patterns on toe bones of early humans hint at changes consistent with frequent boot use, but without preserved examples, the evidence remains indirect. Still, given the climate, it is difficult to imagine survival without some form of footwear. Boots, mittens, and hoods were likely part of the unseen toolkit of Ice Age people. Step by step, the technology of sewing shaped the future. It enabled migrations across Siberia, eventually into the Americas. It allowed human populations to grow in regions previously dominated by cold-adapted animals. It gave communities the ability to plan for winter, to store hides, to pass skills from one generation to the next. Tailored clothing was not just a tool of survival. It was a quiet revolution, extending the human footprint across the frozen world. The ingenuity of Ice Age clothing is easy to overlook because no garments remain. Yet the small bone needle, with its drilled eye, speaks volumes. It tells of hands skilled in fine work, of patience in the dim light, of creativity in the face of cold. Each stitch was an act of endurance, a link in the chain of survival that carried humanity through the Ice Age. In the silence of the mammoth steppe, wrapped in hides stitched with sinew, humans walked across snow and ice. Their garments carried warmth, identity, and memory. Without them, the journey into Ice Age Europe would have ended quickly. With them, it continued, shaping the path toward the future. Deep within the limestone caves of Ice Age Europe, far from the light of the sun, humans left marks that endure across tens of millennia. These are not shelters or hearths, but images and symbols painted and carved on stone walls. Horses, mammoths, bison, reindeer, lions, and abstract signs stretch across ceilings and chambers. Some figures are drawn with simple lines, others shaded with mastery that captures motion and depth. Together, they form one of the earliest surviving expressions of human imagination. The caves of Chauvet, Lascaux, Altamira, and dozens of lesser-known sites remind us that survival in the Ice Age was not only physical, it was also symbolic. Archaeologists have long debated the meaning of these paintings. Some suggest they were linked to hunting, perhaps rituals meant to ensure success. Others see them as reflections of belief, attempts to connect with unseen worlds. Still others think they may have served as teaching tools, transmitting knowledge about animals, movements, and behaviors. What is clear is that the making of such art required time, effort, and resources, commitments beyond immediate survival. The presence of art in Ice Age caves shows that even in the harshest conditions, humans carried with them a need for symbolic expression. The locations themselves are striking. Many images are deep in caves, far from natural light. To reach them, people carried torches or lamps filled with animal fat. Flickering flames illuminated walls, casting moving shadows across painted figures. In this shifting light, animals may have appeared to move, creating a kind of living performance on stone. The act of painting in such places suggests intention. These were not idle doodles on nearby rock surfaces, but deliberate journeys into the earth, undertaken for specific reasons. On the planetary scale, the emergence of cave art coincided with a period of intense climate fluctuation, around 40,000 years ago, when Homo sapiens were spreading through Europe and Neanderthals were fading. Temperatures shifted dramatically, glaciers advanced, steppe expanded, and herds moved in great cycles. In this unstable world, symbolic systems may have offered stability. Art created shared meaning, connecting communities across time and space. A painted mammoth on a cave wall was more than an image. It was a statement that endured when seasons and climates shifted. One lesser-known detail is the use of hand stencils. At several sites, humans placed hands against stone and blew pigment around them, leaving negative impressions. These ghostly shapes are among the most personal of Ice Age mark. They are not depictions of animals or symbols, but direct traces of individuals. Some are small, belonging to women or adolescents. Others are large, belonging to adult men. These prints, silent for thousands of years, connect us directly to their makers. They are not representations of life, they are life pressed against the stone. Mysteries, however, remain unsolved. Why were certain caves chosen while others were left unmarked? Why do some animals dominate paintings, while others are absent, even if they were common in the environment? Lions, for example, appear frequently, though they were dangerous predators. Mammoths are painted in detail, while smaller game, such as hares or birds, rarely appear. Scholars continue to debate whether these choices reflect spiritual beliefs, clan symbols, or simply artistic preference. The meaning of the signs, dots, lines, zigzags, remains even more elusive. They could be counting systems, maps, or abstract symbols of concepts we can no longer reconstruct. Another fascinating discovery lies in the pigments themselves. Artists used red ochre, black charcoal, and sometimes yellow or white minerals. These were not always found near the caves. In some cases, materials were transported from tens of kilometers away, suggesting deliberate collection and preparation. To grind ochre, mix it with water or fat, and apply it to stone required knowledge and skill. The durability of these pigments is remarkable. Images painted more than 30,000 years ago remain visible today, their colors preserved by the stable cave environment. In some caves, engravings accompany paintings. Using stone tools, artists carved lines into the walls, outlining figures or creating textures. At certain sites, clay was modeled into small figures, pressed against walls, or sculpted into shapes. These varied techniques reveal a rich repertoire of symbolic expression. Humans of the Ice Age were not limited in creativity. They experimented with materials, methods, and spaces to make their marks endure. One unresolved question is whether Neanderthals also created such art. As noted earlier, some red markings in caves of Spain have been dated to more than 64,000 years ago, before Homo sapiens arrived. If these dates are correct, then Neanderthals, too, engaged in symbolic activity. This would blur the line between species, suggesting that both shared capacities for meaning. Yet the evidence is still contested. Some scholars question the dating, others the interpretation. For now, the mystery remains. The act of entering caves to create art must also have shaped community life. These were not everyday spaces. Darkness, silence, and narrow passages created an atmosphere apart from ordinary existence. To gather inside with torches, to paint animals larger than life, to leave handprints and signs, this was likely an event, a ritual, a shared experience. Even without knowing the exact purpose, we can sense the weight of meaning carried by such acts. On cold nights outside, people huddled by fires in bone shelters or caves, but at certain times they ventured deep within, carrying flames into the earth. There, they shaped visions on stone, visions that outlasted seasons, glaciers, and millennia. These marks remind us that humans are not only creatures of flesh and bone, but also of thought and imagination. They sought to understand their world not just through tools and hunting, but through symbols and art. Step by step, symbolic expression spread, beads of ivory and shell, carved figurines, and cave paintings all belong to the same web of meaning. Together, they reveal an expanding symbolic world, one where survival included the mind as much as the body. Cave art is one of the most enduring testimonies of this transformation. It is the echo of voices we cannot hear, preserved in stone. In the stillness of the Ice Age, the marks on cave walls glowed in firelight. They spoke of animals, of movement, of presence. They spoke of individuals who pressed their hands against stone, leaving shadows of themselves for eternity. They spoke of communities who gathered in the depths, finding meaning beyond the struggle of survival. And as glaciers advanced and retreated, these images remained, silent witnesses to the symbolic awakening of humanity in Europe. As Ice Age humans moved across Europe, they carried more than tools and hides. They carried symbols of identity, objects of beauty, and gestures of belief. Among the most enduring traces are beads, carvings, and burials, small details that reveal large truths about the inner worlds of early humans. These artifacts remind us that survival was never only about food, fire, and shelter. It was also about meaning, memory, and the unseen. Archaeological discoveries across the continent show the spread of ornaments. At sites like Kostenki in Russia, Vogelherd in Germany, and Dolny Vestonitz in Moravia, tiny beads made of ivory, bone, and shell have been uncovered. Some were pierced and strung together into necklaces. Others were sewn onto clothing. These ornaments were not practical in a narrow sense. They offered no warmth, no calories, no immediate protection. Yet people invested hours in crafting them, shaping each bead with patience. This devotion suggests that ornaments carried significance beyond survival, symbols of identity, connection, or belief. One of the most striking examples comes from the site of Sunghir, near Moscow. Here, burials dating back more than 30,000 years were found, richly decorated with ivory beads. Two adolescents were interred side by side, their clothing covered with thousands of tiny ornaments. Each bead would have taken an hour or more to carve. The total labor represents years of effort. Such investment for the dead reveals not only care, but also belief that the lives of individuals mattered and that meaning continued beyond death. On a planetary scale, this flowering of symbolism coincides with the last glacial period. Ice sheets expanded across northern Europe, lowering sea levels and reshaping landscapes. Life was difficult, uncertain, and often short. Yet precisely in this harsh environment, symbolic expression flourished. The making of beads, figurines, and burials suggests that humans sought stability in the face of instability. Meaning was woven into life, giving structure to existence when the natural world shifted unpredictably. One lesser-known detail lies in the spread of marine shells found far inland. Beads crafted from shells of Mediterranean or Black Sea origin have been discovered hundreds of kilometers from the coast. These must have been carried by networks of exchange or migration. Their presence shows that symbolic objects traveled across vast distances, linking communities far apart. A shell bead buried in a cold inland grave was more than decoration. It was a thread binding landscapes and groups together. Burials themselves tell rich stories. At Dolní Věstonice, in the Czech Republic, a triple burial contains two young men and a woman. Their bodies were arranged carefully, with red ochre sprinkled across them. One man shows signs of deformity, his bones twisted from disease or injury, yet he was buried with the same care as the others. This suggests that communities valued all members, not only the strong hunters. Ritual burial reflects social bonds, memory, and perhaps compassion. Mysteries remain. What exactly did these burials mean? Were they expressions of belief in an afterlife, or gestures of remembrance? Was red ochre symbolic of blood, life, or transformation? Scholars debate, but answers are elusive. The meaning of ritual is difficult to reconstruct from bones and soil. What is certain is that people acted with intention, shaping the deaths of their companions as carefully as their lives. Carvings also reveal symbolic worlds. The so-called Venus figurines, wound from France to Siberia, are small carvings of female forms, often with exaggerated features. Some are ivory, others stone or clay. Their purpose is debated. Some interpret them as fertility symbols, others as teaching tools, or even self-representations. Whatever their meaning, the figurines reveal that humans invested time and effort into symbolic objects carried across generations. At Dolní Věstonice, archaeologists discovered one of the oldest known ceramic figurines, fired in a hearth. This is more than art. It is an early experiment with technology that would much later transform human life, ceramics. That such innovation appeared in a symbolic context shows how intertwined belief and invention could be. The act of shaping clay into figurines, then placing them into fire, was both ritual and experiment. On the scale of human culture, these developments mark a threshold. For the first time, communities left behind evidence not only of what they ate or where they lived, but also of how they thought. Ornaments, figurines, and burials carry meaning that reaches beyond the individual. They signal group identity, shared values, and symbolic systems. Such systems are essential for large communities, where trust and cooperation extend beyond kinship. Symbolic objects may have bound people together, sustaining networks across the vast plains of Ice Age Europe. Another lesser-known discovery is the presence of musical instruments in burials. At Sungheir, ivory rods and perforated pieces may have served as sound makers. At other sites, flutes carved from bird bones were found near graves. These suggest that music was part of ritual life. To place instruments with the dead hints at ceremonies that blended sound, gesture, and belief. In the silence of Ice Age Europe, such ceremonies must have carried profound weight. Mysteries extend further. Did these ornaments and burials reflect shared religion, or were they diverse local traditions? Did symbols mean the same across thousands of kilometers, or did each group interpret them differently? Without written records, answers are beyond reach. Yet the common presence of beads, figurines, and ochre suggests a broad symbolic horizon, stretching across Ice Age Europe. Step by step, this horizon shaped the human experience. The making of ornaments taught patience and precision. The act of burial fostered memory and identity. Carvings and figurines transmitted ideas, even if their exact meanings are lost. Symbolism created continuity, linking the living with the dead, the present with the past. It was as vital as fire or clothing, though less tangible. On the cold plain, wrapped in tailored garments, humans carried beads of ivory, shells from distant seas, and figurines shaped by careful hands. In caves, they left burials sprinkled with ochre, bodies arranged with care. These acts remind us that survival was not only about enduring the cold, but also about creating meaning. Belief and symbol were as much a part of Ice Age life as hunting mammoths or sewing hides. In the stillness of Europe's Ice Age nights, beads shone in firelight, figurines lay in hands, and burials rested under the earth. Each object was a whisper of belief, a gesture toward meaning, a thread connecting humans across vast distances and deep time. These beads, burials, and carvings endure, silent witnesses to the symbolic heart of humanity. As the Ice Age deepened, glaciers pressed outward from their northern strongholds. Great sheets of ice advanced across Scandinavia, Britain, and northern Germany, transforming the continent's face. Valleys filled with ice, rivers were forced into new courses, and coastlines stretched far into the seas. To the people of Europe, these changes were not abstract. They were lived realities, shaping where animals migrated, where water flowed, and where humans could survive. The expansion of ice reshaped entire landscapes. Rivers that once followed gentle valleys were blocked by advancing glaciers, forcing new paths across plains. Some rivers swelled into great torrents fed by meltwater, while others dried as their sources froze. Lakes appeared suddenly, carved by ice and filled with glacial runoff. For hunters and gatherers, these transformations demanded constant adjustment. A valley once rich in reindeer might, within a generation, become a barren field of stone left behind by retreating ice. Archaeologists traced these shifts through layers of sediment, pebbles transported by glaciers, called erratics, mark where ice once stood. River terraces reveal how waterways changed over time. Ancient campsites, once near fertile rivers, now lie stranded on dry uplands. These geological witnesses tell the story of human resilience in the face of relentless change. Each alteration of the land forced choices whether to remain, adapt, or move elsewhere. One lesser-known detail lies in the exposure of vast plains along Europe's coasts. With so much water locked in glaciers, sea levels dropped more than 100 meters. The North Sea basin, now submerged, became a wide grassland plain. Rivers from today's Thames, Rhine, and Elbe joined into a single great waterway flowing north. Archaeologists call this land Doggerland. Though now lost beneath waves, was once home to herds of animals and groups of humans who hunted and travelled across its open spaces. These vanished lands remind us that Europe's Ice Age geography was unlike the continent we know today. The planetary scale of these shifts is immense. Glaciers more than a kilometre thick pressed downward, reshaping Earth's crust. Winds carried dust across thousands of kilometres, creating loess soils that still enrich fields in modern Europe. Ocean currents shifted, altering climate patterns across the globe. In this vast system, humans were small, yet their survival depended on reading its signs. The advance of a glacier was not merely geological, it was a force that redirected migration routes, food supplies, and the paths of entire communities. Mysteries remain about how quickly humans adapted to such changes. Some evidence suggests rapid movements, with camps abandoned as rivers vanished or ice advanced. Other sites show continuity, suggesting groups endured by shifting resources, finding new ways to hunt or fish. Did people anticipate these changes, passing down knowledge of glacial rhythms? Or did they experience each shift as sudden disruption? The archaeological record offers glimpses but not certainty. The shifting of rivers played a crucial role in survival. Rivers were highways of the Ice Age. They guided migrations, provided fresh water, and attracted game. When glaciers blocked a river, entire lifeways shifted. Some groups followed new channels, moving into unfamiliar territories. Others retreated south, into refuges where rivers continued to flow freely. The story of Ice Age Europe is as much about rivers as about ice, for waterways carried life across frozen lands. At sites along the Danube, archaeologists have found evidence of continuous human presence, even during harsh glacial advances. The river may have served as a corridor of survival, offering water, fish, and passage when surrounding lands grew inhospitable. This pattern repeats across Europe, rivers as lifelines, persistent threads of habitability in a shifting world. One intriguing discovery comes from pollen records preserved in sediments. These microscopic traces reveal how vegetation shifted with climate. During glacial peaks, open grasslands dominated, feeding herds of reindeer and horse. During warmer interludes, shrubs and sparse forests spread. For humans, these changes dictated strategies. Open plains encouraged large game hunting, while wooded valleys demanded flexibility, with smaller prey and gathered plants playing larger roles. Clothing, tools, and shelters all adapted in rhythm with these ecological shifts. The loss and gain of land also influenced symbolic life. Burials sprinkled with red ochre, found in regions later covered by ice, suggest communities returned to places that were eventually erased. The memory of rivers and valleys may have lingered in stories long after glaciers advanced. When the ice later retreated, new generations found landscapes marked by scars of stone and water. remnants of worlds their ancestors once knew. Mystery surrounds the speed of glacial cycles. At times, ice advanced within a few centuries, swift enough to affect multiple generations directly. Such rapid changes may have created both crises and opportunities. Hunters following reindeer might find new valleys suddenly rich with grass, while others saw their hunting grounds vanish. These contrasts shaped population movements, scattering groups into refugees while opening new frontiers elsewhere. On the scale of human experience, these changes were immense. Imagine walking across a plain where the horizon seemed endless, only to return a generation later and find it buried under ice. Imagine drinking from a river that, within a lifetime, carved a new channel dozens of kilometers away. For Ice Age humans, the land itself was alive, shifting and remaking itself with each cycle of cold and thaw. Another lesser-known aspect lies in the role of wind. As glaciers advanced, winds carried fine dust across Europe, depositing thick layers of loess. These soils preserved footprints, hearths, and campsites, covering them like blankets until rediscovered thousands of years later. For the people who lived there, the dust was part of daily life, grit in the air, settling on hides and tools, carried in every breath. Yet this same dust later preserved their traces, a paradox of hardship and memory. Step by step, humans navigated this shifting world. They moved when ice forced rivers aside, hunted on plains that later sank beneath seas, and endured dust storms carried from glacial fronts. Each adaptation was part of the long dance with climate, a dialogue between fragile bodies and a restless planet. The ability to adjust, to leave when valleys froze, to return when ice retreated, was as vital as fire or clothing. In the stillness of glacial Europe, rivers cut new paths, plains stretched far to the west, and glaciers advanced with slow but unstoppable force. Against this backdrop, humans walked, hunted, and left their traces in the soil. Their world was never fixed. It shifted beneath their feet, demanding resilience and vision. The story of rivers and ice is not only geology, it is the story of human survival, written in water and stone across the continent. Across the frozen expanse of Ice Age Europe, movement was constant. Animals migrated in great seasonal rhythms, and humans followed in their wake. Yet to cross such a landscape was no simple task. Rivers cut wide channels through plains. Lakes froze solid, their surfaces gleaming under pale winter skies. Glacial valleys created barriers of ice and stone. To survive, humans needed not only endurance, but also pathways, routes carved by nature and understood through careful observation. In this world, frozen waters became both obstacle and opportunity. Archaeological sites along major rivers, such as the Danube and the Dnieper, reveal how humans positioned themselves at these corridors. Camps cluster near ancient river terraces, where crossings were possible in winter when ice thickened. Footprints preserved in sediments and patterns of stone tool distribution suggest that rivers were not merely barriers but guides. They oriented movement across the vast steppe, offering fish, water, and seasonal crossings. In some region, humans may have deliberately timed migrations to coincide with freezing, turning rivers into solid highways across the land. One lesser-known detail comes from finds of worked antler and bone points discovered near riverbeds. These may have served as ice picks or digging tools used to break through frozen layers to reach water or fish. Their presence shows ingenuity in dealing with the challenges of frozen environments. Even when water seemed locked away, Humans found ways to access it, chipping through ice or collecting meltwater at glacial edges. Survival depended on such resourcefulness. The crossing of frozen lakes left few direct traces, but indirect evidence speaks loudly. Sites on opposite shores of Ice Age lakes reveal patterns of movement that suggest winter crossings. In milder months, such journeys would have required boats or long detours. But in deep winter, when ice spread thick across the surface, humans could walk directly across. The risks were real. Thin ice could crack, freezing winds could sweep across unbroken expanses, and storms could trap travelers in open terrain. Yet the advantages outweighed dangers. Frozen lakes shortened journeys, connecting hunting grounds and camps across great distances. On the planetary scale, these crossings were shaped by glacial rhythms. When ice sheets expanded, rivers shifted, valleys deepened, and lakes grew behind glacial dams. As glaciers retreated, meltwater poured across plains, creating temporary floodways. Humans adapted by following these cycles, learning to read signs in the land. The presence of driftwood along ice edges, the sound of cracking in frozen lakes, the tracks of reindeer across rivers all provided knowledge about when and where crossings were safe. Mysteries remain about the exact methods used. Did humans craft sleds or travois to pull goods across snow and ice? Evidence is indirect. Wear marks on bones hint at possible dragging devices, but no definitive sleds have survived. Some scholars speculate that hides may have been used as makeshift sled surfaces, allowing heavy loads to be pulled across frozen ground. Whether such tools existed or not, humans certainly carried knowledge of how to move supplies efficiently. The distances they traveled required more than brute strength. They required innovation. Hunters relied on these frozen routes to follow herds. Reindeer, in particular, crossed rivers and lakes along seasonal paths. Humans who understood these rhythms could intercept them at choke points. Archaeological remains at some sites suggest large-scale hunts where groups gathered to drive herds across frozen ground. The prints of animals preserved in sediment reveal sudden concentrations, as if whole groups were funneled into narrow crossings. Here, hunters struck, using spears and coordination to secure food for the season. Another intriguing discovery comes from caves near river valleys, where soot deposits suggest winter use. These shelters may have served as staging points for river crossings, places where groups rested before attempting difficult journeys. The positioning of these caves underscores the importance of waterways not only as resources but also as boundaries to be negotiated with care. Movement was never random. It followed a rhythm set by ice, water, and the animals that depended on them. Crossing frozen corridors also connected human groups. Archaeologists find exotic materials, flint from distant quarries, shells from coastal zones, far inland. These objects traveled along routes that likely followed frozen rivers in winter. Exchange and contact were facilitated by the very ice that seemed to hinder movement. In this way, frozen waters acted as both barrier and bridge, shaping not only survival but also communication and culture. On the scale of daily life, the practical challenges were immense. Clothing had to be suited for long exposure to wind. Boots, perhaps lined with fur, prevented frostbite during crossings. Fire-making kits were essential, carried carefully to ensure that flames could be lit if storms struck. Knowledge of landmarks guided travelers across white landscapes where horizons blurred and directions were easily lost. Each journey was a test of preparation and resilience. Yet these challenges also created opportunities for memory and tradition. Knowledge of safe crossings would have been passed down through generations. Elders may have taught the young where ice was thickest, where rivers froze earliest, and which lakes could be trusted. Though we cannot hear their voices, the survival of human groups across such landscapes speaks to the careful transmission of wisdom. The land itself became a book of memory, read through observation and taught by experience. One unresolved mystery concerns the role of dogs in these journeys. By the late Ice Age, evidence suggests humans had begun forming relationships with wolves that would later become domesticated dogs. Did these early companions help scout routes, detect danger, or carry loads? The archaeological record is sparse, but the possibility lingers. If so, the crossing of frozen waters may have been one of the contexts in which human-animal cooperation began to flourish. Step by step, humans learned to move not only with the seasons but also with the transformations of ice. They saw opportunity in frozen rivers, used lakes as winter pathways, and adapted to the shifting courses of glacial valleys. Each crossing was a risk, yet each successful journey extended the human presence further into the continent. These routes linked groups, opened hunting grounds, and wove together the scattered communities of Ice Age Europe. In the stillness of winter, when stars reflected on frozen lakes and winds carried across open plains, humans walked across water turned to stone, their footprints, now lost beneath millennia of thaw and flood, once marked paths of resilience and ingenuity. These crossings remind us that survival in the Ice Age was not only about enduring the cold, but also about mastering its rhythms, turning obstacles into bridges, and finding ways forward across a frozen world. As the cold of the Ice Age reached its deepest grip, much of northern Europe became uninhabitable. Glaciers pressed far southward, covering mountains, valleys, and plains in sheets of ice. Vast tundras spread around their edges, windswept and treeless. Herds moved south, following patches of grass that survived in milder zones. Humans, too, retreated. Across the continent, populations clustered into southern refuges, regions where climate remained less severe, where plants still grew, and where rivers still flowed free of ice. Iberia, Italy, and the Balkans became sanctuaries. Within these regions, humanity endured through the harshest centuries of the last glacial maximum. The Iberian Peninsula offered a mixture of coasts, river valleys, and sheltered uplands. Archaeological sites such as El Castillo and Altamira preserve traces of human presence throughout these difficult times. Here, caves provided protection, while coasts offered fish, shellfish, and birds. Red deer roamed in valleys, joined by wild horses and aurochs. For people, this combination of food sources created stability even as the north froze. Iberia thus became one of the most significant refugees of the Ice Age, sustaining groups for thousands of years. Italy, too, offered sanctuary. Though the Alps were buried under ice, the peninsula's central and southern regions remained habitable. The Apennine Mountains provided shelter, while river valleys supported plant growth. At sites like Paglici Cave, archaeologists have found stone tools, hearths, and painted walls dating to this period. The continuity of occupation here suggests that humans held onto the land even during glacial peaks. The Italian refuge connected the Mediterranean world with Central Europe, serving as a bridge for later re-expansion northward. The Balkans formed another crucial refuge. Mountains and valleys created microclimates where vegetation persisted despite the cold. Rivers such as the Danube provided water and passage, linking the region to Central Europe. Sites like Bachokiro in Bulgaria and Franchti Cave in Greece preserve evidence of continuous human presence. The Balkans were not only a refuge, but also a corridor, maintaining contact between Europe and Western Asia. In these landscapes, humans sheltered, exchanged knowledge, and prepared for eventual movement northward again. On the planetary scale, these refugees mirrored patterns found elsewhere. In Asia, humans clustered in parts of China and southern Siberia. In North America, groups survived south of the ice sheets. Across the globe, survival often meant retreating into pockets where climates remained favorable. Europe's refugees were part of this larger pattern, sanctuaries within a frozen world. Without them, populations might have vanished entirely from the continent. One lesser-known detail comes from genetic studies. Populations living in these southern refugees left distinct signatures in DNA. After the glaciers retreated, their descendants expanded northward again, carrying these genetic markers across Europe. Modern Europeans still carry traces of these Ice Age refugees in their genomes. The continuity of survival is written not only in stone tools and caves, but also in the very structure of human DNA. The archaeological record of refugees also reveals symbolic life. In Iberian caves, paintings of bison, deer, and horses continued even during the harshest glacial centuries. The creation of art in times of scarcity suggests that symbolic systems were as vital as food and fire. In Italy, burials sprinkled with red ochre date from this period, evidence of ritual continuity. These practices show that refugees were not merely shelters for the body, but also sanctuaries for culture. Mysteries remain about the size and structure of refuge populations. How many people lived in Iberia, Italy, or the Balkans during the glacial maximum? Estimates vary widely. Some suggest only a few thousand survived across all Europe, scattered in isolated groups. Others believe larger populations endured in these refugees, supported by rich environments. The archaeological evidence is fragmentary, leaving questions about the scale of survival unresolved. The isolation of refugees also shaped diversity. Groups separated by mountains, seas, and glaciers developed distinctive tool traditions. In Iberia, the Solutrean culture emerged, marked by finely crafted stone points with elegant, leaf-shaped forms. In Italy and the Balkans, different styles took shape. These variations reflect adaptation to local conditions, but also the cultural creativity of groups living apart. Later, as populations re-expanded, these traditions mingled, enriching the cultural mosaic of Europe. Another intriguing discovery comes from shell ornaments found in Iberian caves. Some shells originate from distant coasts, suggesting exchange networks even during the glacial maximum. Despite isolation, contacts may have continued along Mediterranean routes. This hints at resilience not only in survival, but also in maintaining communication across fragmented landscapes. Symbolic objects, carried across distances, served as fragile threads linking scattered groups. On the level of daily life, refugees provided essential resources. Coasts offered fish and shellfish, reliable even in harsh climates. Rivers supported freshwater fish and waterfowl. Valleys sheltered herds of deer and horses, providing meat, hides, and bone. Plants, though sparse, included nuts, roots, and fruits in warmer seasons. These varied resources created more stable food webs than in the frozen north. Humans who found such refuges could endure, even when glaciers advanced over most of Europe. The importance of refugees extended far into the future. When climates warmed again and glaciers retreated, these southern populations became the source of recolonization. Genetic and archaeological evidence shows waves of re-expansion northward, following rivers and plains as ice withdrew. The survival of Europe's population during the Ice Age depended on these sanctuaries. They were cradles of endurance, protecting both people and traditions through centuries of cold. Mysteries continue to challenge scholars. Did refugees remain isolated, or were they connected by long-distance networks? How much movement occurred between Iberia, Italy, and the Balkans? Genetic evidence suggests some mixing, but the extent is unclear. Archaeologists seek clues in stone tool styles, ornaments, and burial practices. Each discovery adds a fragment to the picture, but the full story remains incomplete. Step by step, refugees shape the destiny of Europe. In their caves, fires burned through long winters. In their valleys, hunters pursued deer and horses. In their shelters, beads were strung, paintings created, burials arranged. Against the backdrop of glaciers, these acts preserved not only survival but also humanity. Refugees were more than geographic zones. They were crucibles where life, culture, and memory endured. In the stillness of glacial Europe, when ice buried the north and winds swept across barren steppes, refugees glowed with firelight. Here, humans endured together, carrying forward their skills, beliefs, and stories. From these sanctuaries, they would later re-emerge, filling the continent once more. The story of refugees reminds us that survival is often about holding on in small spaces, waiting for the world to change, and preparing for what comes next. As the Ice Age shifted once more, climates began to fluctuate. Glaciers advanced and retreated in cycles, sometimes over centuries, sometimes more quickly. With each retreat, new lands opened, covered in grasses and shrubs. Herds of reindeer, horses, and bison spread northward, following these fresh pastures. And with them, humans returned to lands that had been abandoned during the harshest cold. This was the re-expansion of the hunters, the gradual recolonization of Europe after the glacial maximum. Archaeological sites across Central and Northern Europe testify to this movement. Hearths appear again in valleys once silent. Stone tools scatter across plains once buried in ice. In France, Germany, and Poland, traces of reindeer hunters become more frequent after about 20,000 years ago. These groups were highly mobile, following herds over long distances. Campsites suggest short stays, oriented towards seasonal hunting. The rhythm of life became one of movement and return, patterned by the cycles of migration. Reindeer were central to this world. Their herds migrated predictably, moving north in summer and south in winter. Hunters who understood these rhythms could intercept them along river valleys and mountain passes. Evidence from sites like Pinsevent in France shows organized camps where reindeer were butchered in large numbers. Bones scattered across hearths suggest that entire herds may have been taken, feeding communities through long seasons. Every part of the animal was used: meat for food, hides for clothing and shelter, sinew for thread, antlers for tools. The reindeer was a complete resource, sustaining life in many forms. On the planetary scale, this re-expansion coincided with gradual warming. Temperatures rose, ice sheets retreated, and ecosystems shifted northward. Rivers that had been blocked by ice flowed freely again. New valleys opened, offering corridors of movement. For humans, this meant opportunity. lands once closed were now accessible, rich in game and raw materials. The continent reshaped itself, and people adapted by spreading into these new spaces. One lesser-known detail emerges from the discovery of specialized hunting weapons. Long, slender stone points, known as shouldered points, appeared during this period. They were likely hafted onto spears or darts, designed for efficiency in hunting fast-moving reindeer. Their distribution across wide regions suggests networks of knowledge and contact. Technology spread along with people, linking groups across the continent. These innovations show that re-expansion was not only geographic but also cultural. Mysteries remain about the pace of this recolonization. Did groups move rapidly into newly opened lands, or was the process gradual, with long pauses in refuges? The archaeological record suggests both patterns. Some regions show sudden bursts of occupation, while others reveal slow and steady return. Climate instability added complexity. Sudden cold snaps interrupted warming, forcing groups to retreat southward again. Survival required flexibility, moving forward when conditions allowed, holding back when the cold returned. The role of rivers was once again central. Rivers like the Seine, the Rhine, and the Danube guided re-expansion, serving as pathways north. Along their banks, humans left traces of camps, tools, and art. Fish and waterfowl supplemented diets, adding variety to the meat of large game. Rivers also linked groups, enabling contact and exchange. The re-expansion of hunters was not random wandering, but a structured movement, oriented by the natural corridors of Europe. Another fascinating discovery comes from the art of this period. Portable carvings of reindeer, horses, and birds appear on bone and antler. At sites in France and Germany, engravings depict not only animals, but also detailed scenes of hunting. These artworks suggest that symbolic life flourished alongside practical survival. Hunters who followed reindeer across thousands of kilometers also carried imagination and memory, etched into tools and ornaments. Art was both expression and continuity, binding communities together in the face of constant movement. On the level of daily life, the re-expansion required careful planning. Camps had to be built quickly, often dismantled after short stays. Hides were stretched over frames, fires lit in central hearths, food stored for journeys. Clothing, tailored with bone needles, was essential for mobility in fluctuating climates. Tools had to be light, transportable, and repairable. Archaeologists find evidence of standardized toolkits, suggesting that efficiency and mobility were priorities. Life was lived on the move, guided by herds and seasons. Genetic studies add another dimension to this story. DNA from human remains shows that populations from southern refugees spread northward, mixing with other groups along the way. The re-expansion was not a single wave, but a complex process of movement, contact, and blending. Modern Europeans still carry genetic traces of these migrations, legacies of hunters who followed herds into the thawing continent. Mystery surrounds the interactions between groups during this period. Did re-expanding hunters meet others who had endured in northern pockets? Or was Europe largely empty after the glacial maximum? The evidence is scarce. A few sites suggest continuity, but most point to reoccupation after long gaps. If encounters occurred, they may have involved exchange, alliance, or competition. The details are lost, but the broader pattern is clear. Europe filled once more with people, spreading from its southern sanctuaries. One lesser-known element is the role of birds. Archaeological sites contain bones of swans, geese, and ducks hunted during migrations. These seasonal birds added food diversity, especially in spring and autumn. Their presence highlights how humans adapted to all available resources. Reindeer and horses dominated diets, but birds, fish, and plants supplemented them. This flexibility supported expansion into new territories, ensuring survival even when herds shifted unexpectedly. Step by step, hunters reclaimed the continent. They followed reindeer across thawing plains, crossed rivers newly free of ice, and built camps in valleys once buried under glaciers. Their tools grew specialized, their art more detailed, their movements more far-reaching. The Ice Age still held Europe in its grip, but humans had learned its rhythms. They knew when to move, when to wait, and how to adapt to every change. In the stillness of post-glacial Europe, fires once again burned in northern valleys, smoke rising where silence had lingered. Reindeer herds crossed rivers, followed by hunters with finely made spears. Camps dotted the plains, temporary yet vital. And in carved bone, etched antler, and painted stone, humans recorded their presence. The return of the hunters was not only a recolonization of land, but also a reaffirmation of endurance. Against the backdrop of retreating ice, humanity reclaimed the north step by step, season by season. As Ice Age hunters spread back across Europe, they did not move as isolated bands. Evidence shows that connections stretched across vast distances, linking people separated by hundreds or even thousands of kilometers. Stone, bone, and shell objects, carried far from their places of origin, reveal the presence of long-distance networks. These networks were not trade in the modern sense, but systems of exchange, movement, and shared knowledge that bound scattered groups together across a fragmented continent. Archaeologists uncover clues in the distribution of raw materials. Flint from specific quarries appears far from its source, carried into regions where no such stone exists. At sites in Central Europe, flint from the Paris Basin has been found hundreds of kilometers east of its origin. In Italy, obsidian from volcanic islands traveled inland, shaped into blades and scrapers. These movements suggest that humans valued particular materials not only for their utility, but also for the connections they symbolized. A blade made of exotic stone was both tool and message, evidence of contact beyond the horizon. Shell ornaments provide even clearer testimony. Marine shells from Mediterranean and Atlantic coasts appeared deep inland, in burials and campsites far from the sea. Some shells were pierced and strung into necklaces, others polished into smooth bead. So their presence shows that symbolic objects traveled enormous distances. A shell buried with a hunter in Central Europe may have passed through many hands before arriving there, each exchange reinforcing ties between groups. These ornaments were fragile threads linking communities separated by glaciers, rivers, and plains. On the planetary scale, such networks reflect a broader human pattern. Across Africa, Asia, and the Americas, hunter-gatherer groups maintained connections through ornaments, raw materials, and marriage ties. In Ice Age Europe, the scale of exchange is remarkable given the challenges of the environment. Glaciers, frozen rivers, and vast steppes lay between groups, yet contact endured. Networks ensured not only the flow of objects but also the flow of information, where herds moved, where shelters stood, where dangers threatened. In a world of constant change, connections were lifelines. One lesser-known detail comes from the site of Sungheir in Russia. Alongside richly decorated burials, archaeologists found long ivory rods, carefully carved and aligned. Some scholars suggest these rods may have served as gifts exchanged between groups, markers of alliance or kinship. Their elaborate form and the labor invested in them imply a significance beyond function. If true, they represent one of the earliest known examples of material symbols used to cement social bonds. Mysteries remain about how exactly these networks operated. Did groups meet seasonally at gathering places, exchanging goods and stories before dispersing again? Or did objects pass slowly, hand to hand, across generations and landscapes? The archaeological record offers glimpses but no definitive answers. What is certain is that materials travelled farther than single families could have carried them alone. Networks must have extended across multiple groups, forming webs of contact that spanned the continent. Stone tools provide further evidence. In some regions, distinctive blade types appear far from their origin. These may have been copied by distant groups, or they may have been carried as finished tools. The spread of such techniques suggests communication, teaching, observation, imitation, cultural knowledge, like physical objects, moved across the land. The networks of Ice Age Europe were not only material but intellectual, sustaining continuity across fragmented populations. Another intriguing discovery comes from stylistic similarities in art. Carvings of animals, engravings on bone, and painted motifs sometimes share common forms across wide regions. A particular way of depicting a reindeer, or a repeated pattern of dots, appears in sites separated by hundreds of kilometers. Such parallels hint at shared symbolic systems. Perhaps groups across Europe recognized common signs, a symbolic language that transcended distance. The details of meaning are lost, but the patterns suggest that art, too, was part of these networks. On the level of daily life, networks offered security. A group facing scarcity in one valley might rely on connections with others to share resources or information. Exchange of marriage partners likely played a role, reducing isolation and maintaining genetic diversity. Genetic studies of ancient remains show evidence of mixing between populations, consistent with wide-ranging contact. For small groups scattered across harsh environments, such connections were essential for survival. The significance of these networks becomes even clearer when compared with the challenges of the Ice Age landscape. Vast distances, extreme cold, and unpredictable climates made isolation dangerous. A group cut off from others risked extinction if herds vanished or resources failed. Networks reduced this risk, weaving communities into a larger fabric of survival. Objects like shells, flint, and beads were more than possessions. They were anchors of connection in a shifting world. One unresolved question concerns the role of ritual in maintaining these ties. Some archaeologists suggest that gatherings at certain sites, where art, burials, and ornaments cluster, may have served as communal events. Groups could have met seasonally to exchange goods, arrange marriages, and reinforce symbolic systems. Such gatherings would have been critical moments of connection, strengthening bonds that carried people through the long months of isolation. Yet direct evidence is elusive. The traces are scattered, requiring careful reconstruction from stone and bone. On the planetary scale, these networks illustrate humanity's capacity for cooperation. Other species adapted to the Ice Age through strength, size, or speed. Humans survived by sharing, by carrying shells across mountains, by trading flint across rivers, by passing knowledge through generations. These networks extended the reach of small groups, linking them into continental webs of resilience. Another lesser-known clue comes from isotopic studies of human teeth. Chemical signatures reveal that some individuals buried in certain regions were not local, but had grown up elsewhere. This movement of people complements the movement of objects. Individuals themselves traveled across network, bringing skills, stories, and genes with them. The Ice Age world was not static. It was dynamic, with people, objects, and ideas moving across great distances, step by step. These connections shaped the course of humanity in Europe. They allowed survival through harsh climates, supported symbolic systems, and prepared the ground for later cultural transformations. Without networks, small groups might have withered in isolation. With them, they endured, shared, and grew. In the stillness of glacial valleys, a necklace of shells gleamed in firelight, carried from a distant coast, a blade of exotic flint cut into hide, sharp because knowledge had travelled with it. A carving echoed a style seen far away, connecting minds across the steppe. These fragile threads bound scattered people into a web of survival, resilience, and meaning. The networks of stone and bone remind us that even in the harshest of worlds, humans found ways to connect, to share, and to endure together. As the long winter of the Ice Age began to loosen its hold, the continent entered a period of dramatic transformation. Around 15,000 years ago, glaciers that had dominated northern Europe for tens of millennia began to retreat. The air warmed, ice melted, and vast torrents of water poured across the land. This was the Great Melt, a planetary shift that reshaped rivers, carved new valleys, and drowned entire plains. For humans who had endured the depths of the cold, the world itself seemed to change beneath their feet. The retreat of glaciers was not a gentle process. Ice sheets more than a kilometre thick cracked and collapsed, releasing floods that raced across plains. These sudden surges scoured landscapes, leaving behind boulder fields, gravel ridges, and new lakes. Meltwater carved channels that became rivers, while others vanished as courses shifted. In northern Germany and Poland, huge basins filled with meltwater became inland seas. Across the North Sea basin, then a wide grassland plain, floodwaters advanced, swallowing valleys and creating marshes. What had been fertile hunting grounds soon disappeared under rising seas. Archaeological traces tell of human responses to these changes. Campsites once established on open plains now lie submerged beneath water, their stone tools and bones hidden below waves. In Doggerland, the lost land of the North Sea, submerged forests and peat beds reveal where people once walked, hunted, and gathered. Though most material is buried, occasional finds of flint tools or animal bones dredged from the seabed hint at this vanished world. To the hunters who lived there, the flooding must have been both gradual and sudden, coastlines creeping inward, punctuated by catastrophic floods that transformed landscapes overnight. On the planetary scale, these floods were part of a global story. As ice sheets melted and sea levels rose more than 100 meters worldwide, entire continents were reshaped, coasts shifted outward, islands merged or disappeared, and ocean currents altered. Europe was one theatre of this global transformation, but similar processes occurred from Asia to the Americas. The Great Melt was a planetary force, uniting humanity in its impact. One lesser-known detail lies in the presence of glacial outburst floods. These occurred when meltwater lakes trapped behind ice sheets suddenly broke through. In some cases, walls of water taller than buildings rushed across valleys, destroying everything in their path. Geological evidence in Eastern Europe and Siberia shows giant ripple marks carved into plains, traces of these immense floods. Though direct evidence of human encounters is scarce, such events must have left deep impressions, Rivers rising in hours, valleys drowned, camps swept away. Survival demanded vigilance and mobility. Mysteries surround how people perceived these transformations. Did they recognize the slow rise of seas, or was it experienced only as repeated displacements from camps near coasts and rivers? Did they weave stories about the waters swallowing lands, or did they simply move without reflection? Archaeology cannot answer fully. What is clear is that humans adapted, shifting camps, following herds into new territories, and seeking high ground as waters advanced. The reorganization of rivers played a major role in this era. Ancient channels blocked by ice reopened, while new ones formed from meltwater. The Seine, the Rhine, and the Thames carved new courses. Along these rivers, fresh floodplains emerged, rich in plants and animals. Humans followed, exploiting fish, waterfowl, and game drawn to wetlands. In some regions, settlements clustered along these renewed waterways, marking a shift toward more permanent use of river valleys. Another intriguing discovery comes from pollen records preserved in sediments. As climates warmed, tundra gave way to shrubs, then forests. Birch and pine spread across Europe, followed by oak and hazel. These ecological shifts altered hunting strategies. Open plains that had supported reindeer herds gradually closed into forests, favoring deer and wild boar. Humans adapted by diversifying their diets, hunting smaller, more elusive animals, and gathering plant foods in greater abundance. The Great Melt was not only a story of water, but also of forests reclaiming the land. On the level of technology, new tools emerged to meet changing conditions. Microliths, tiny stone blades, appear in this period, set into wooden shafts to create composite weapons. These were suited for hunting in forests, where quick, flexible tools were more useful than the long spears of open plains. The spread of microlith technology across Europe reflects the adaptive response to new environments. Hunters of the mammoth steppe became hunters of woodland animals, adjusting their tools to shifting ecosystems. Genetic evidence adds another layer. As climates warmed, populations from southern refugees spread northward again, mingling with groups already established in central regions. This mixing created new genetic lineages, blending traditions and knowledge. The Great Melt thus shaped not only landscapes but also the human population itself. The diversity of modern Europeans carries traces of these post-glacial movements, written into DNA. One lesser-known aspect lies in the survival of rock shelters that preserve layers of this transition. At sites like Arnsberg in Germany, archaeologists find evidence of reindeer hunters adjusting to new forests, shifting from large herd hunting to more targeted strategies. Flint tools, hearths, and butchery marks record this adaptation step by step. These sites show how humans endured the instability of the Great Melt by transforming their ways of life rather than clinging to vanished patterns. Mystery lingers about the role of symbolic life in this era of change. Cave art continued in some regions, but portable art became more common. Carvings of animals, decorated tools, and ornaments, perhaps mobility, demanded by shifting waters and forests, encouraged symbolism that could be carried rather than painted deep in caves. Did people mourn the loss of landscapes swallowed by seas? Did they mark these changes in ritual or story? The record offers only fragments, but the persistence of symbolic objects suggests that meaning remained central, even in upheaval. Step by step, the Great Melt transformed Europe from a continent of steppes and glaciers into one of rivers and forests. Humans walked this transition, moving with herds, adapting tools, shifting diets, and maintaining networks. The flooding of Doggerland, the carving of rivers, the spread of forests, all were challenges, but also opportunities. New lands opened, new resources appeared, and human presence expanded into regions once too harsh to inhabit. In the stillness of thawing Europe, water poured from glaciers in endless streams, rivers carved fresh valleys, and forests spread across plains. Camps once perched on open steppes gave way to settlements near lakes and rivers. Hunters became more flexible, gatherers more resourceful, communities more connected. The Great Melt was both an ending and a beginning, the close of the mammoth steppe world, and the dawn of new landscapes that would shape the next chapters of human history. As the Ice Age drew to its gradual end, the face of Europe transformed once more. Glaciers, which had once pressed southward with unstoppable force, continued their retreat. Valleys that had echoed with the creak of ice and the calls of reindeer now filled with birdsong and the rustle of leaves. Forests spread across plains, rivers carved new, steady paths, and climates warmed into a more stable rhythm. For humans, this was not just the end of an age of cold. It was the beginning of a new world, one in which survival no longer depended solely on following herds, but on reshaping landscapes, experimenting with plants, and preparing the ground for farming. The retreat of the ice opened vast new territories, where glaciers had crushed stone and soil. Fertile lands remained, enriched by sediments. Wetlands expanded along rivers, providing fish, waterfowl, and reeds. Forests of birch, pine, oak, and hazel spread rapidly, offering nuts, berries, and wood for tools. This mosaic of environments provided new opportunities for human groups, no longer confined to the margins of glaciers. They now lived in a world of abundance and variety. Archaeologists trace this shift in the record of tools and settlements. Large spear points, once suited to hunting mammoth or reindeer on open plains, gave way to microliths and arrowheads designed for forest animals. At sites in northern Europe, traces of bows and arrows appear, signaling more efficient hunting in wooded environments. Fishing tools, such as harpoons and bone points, become more common, reflecting the growing importance of rivers and lakes. Humans no longer depended solely on great herds. Their diets broadened, their strategies diversified. One lesser-known detail is the use of hazelnuts, charred shells, preserved in archaeological layers, show that people gathered and roasted them in large quantities. Hazelnuts provided calories, oils, and storage potential, making them a vital resource in the late Ice Age world. In some sites, great piles of shells suggest seasonal gatherings, perhaps with entire communities harvesting and roasting together. This reliance on nuts marks a step toward broader use of plant foods, foreshadowing the agricultural shifts to come. On the planetary scale, the end of the Ice Age was marked by a dramatic rise in sea levels. As glaciers melted, coastlines advanced inland, drowning plains and reshaping islands. Doggerland, once a broad grassland linking Britain to Europe, disappeared beneath waves. Coasts that had stretched far outward returned to their modern shapes. For humans, this meant loss as well as opportunity. Hunting grounds vanished, but fishing and seafaring grew in importance. The planet itself reshaped the boundaries of life, guiding humanity toward new adaptations. Mysteries remain about how humans responded to these changes. Did they sense the shift as a gradual opening of the world, or as sudden floods and disruptions? Did they pass down stories of drowned valleys and lost plains? Some scholars believe ancient myths of flood, preserved in later cultures, may echo these deep memories. The archaeological record shows the practical adjustments, new tools, new settlements, but the inner experience of this transformation remains beyond reach. The southern refugees that had sustained humanity during the cold now became centers of expansion. From Iberia, Italy, and the Balkans, populations spread northward once more, filling forests and valleys. Genetic evidence confirms this movement as lineages from refugees appear across Europe. Yet these were not simple migrations. Populations mixed, creating new genetic and cultural mosaics. The Europe that emerged was both continuous with the Ice Age past and transformed by the warming world. Another intriguing development is the construction of more permanent dwellings. Archaeological sites in northern Europe show post holes and structures suggesting huts of wood and thatch. While mobility remained important, some groups began to return seasonally to the same locations. Rivers, lakes, and fertile valleys encouraged repeated use. In these places, these social bonds deepened, and traditions rooted themselves more firmly in landscapes. The seeds of settled life were planted in these seasonal camps. Symbolic life also adapted. Cave art became less common, while portable art and decorated tools continued. Carvings of animals, figurines, and ornaments reflected ongoing symbolic systems. Burial practices remained diverse, with red ochre, beads, and ornaments accompanying the dead. Yet in some regions, cemeteries emerged, places where multiple generations were buried together. This continuity suggests a growing sense of community tied to specific places, a step toward the rootedness that farming would later bring. One lesser-known aspect of this transition is the domestication of animals. While true farming was still in the future, relationships with certain animals were already changing. Dogs, first domesticated during the Ice Age, became more common companions. Burials of dogs alongside humans from this period suggest close bonds. Dogs likely aided in hunting, carrying loads, and guarding camps. Their presence marks a subtle shift toward a world in which humans and animals shaped each other's destinies. Mystery surrounds the early experiments with plants. Some evidence hints that people began tending wild stands of cereals, encouraging their growth near camps. At sites in the Near East, these practices would soon lead to farming. In Europe, the process was slower, but the potential was present. The gathering of nuts, fruits, and grains laid the foundation for the agricultural revolutions to come. The line between hunter and farmer blurred as people learned to shape their environments more actively. On the planetary scale, the stabilization of climate after the Great Melt created conditions for growth. The Holocene, the warm epoch that followed the Ice Age, provided longer summers, more reliable seasons, and fertile soils. Humans entered this new world with skills forged in hardship, mobility, cooperation, symbolic expression, and adaptation. These capacities, honed during the cold, prepared them for the challenges of abundance. Step by step, the seeds of a new world were sown. Hunters became gatherers of plants as well as animals. Communities grew larger, connected by exchange networks that stretched across forests and rivers. Permanent shelters and cemeteries marked continuity in place. Dogs joined humans as companions, while experiments with plants hinted at farming. The Ice Age, with its glaciers and herds, faded into memory, replaced by forests, rivers, and settlements. In the stillness of post-glacial Europe, fires burned not only in shelters of hide and bone, but also in huts of wood beside rivers. Children gathered hazelnuts, hunters cast harpoons into lakes, and dogs lay beside hearths. Forests spread, seas rose, and the continent reshaped itself. From these shifts emerged the foundations of a new way of life, the first steps toward farming, herding, and settled communities. The Ice Age had ended, but its lessons endured. Resilience, cooperation, and imagination carried humanity through the cold and into the warmth. The seeds of the future lay in the skills of the past. In the forests of the Holocene, humans began the long journey from hunting and gathering to farming and settlement, a journey that would transform not only Europe but the world. The glaciers are gone now, their weight lifted from the valleys of Europe. Forests spread, rivers settle into familiar courses, and seas rise to claim the plains once walked by reindeer hunters. What remains are traces, stone blades buried in soil, beads of ivory and shell, ochre dust in graves, painted walls deep within caves. These fragments whisper of a time when survival balanced on fire, clothing, and the rhythms of ice. Much is still unknown. We cannot be sure why Neanderthals disappeared, or how people first marked meaning in caves, or what stories they told as rivers shifted and plains drowned. We know only that they endured, carrying memory through cold centuries, adapting to each turn of climate. Their world was fragile, but their resilience immense. What endures is not only survival, but continuity. The people of the Ice Age are part of us. Their DNA flows in our vein, their inventions echo in our technologies, their symbolic worlds foreshadow our own. In their shelters of bone, their tailored garments, their beads and carvings, we see the beginnings of the long human story that leads to the present. And so the Ice Age closes, and the continent warms, fields open, and seeds take root. Yet in the stillness of Europe's caves and valleys, the memory of glaciers lingers. To listen to these traces is to hear voices carried across tens of thousands of years, quiet yet steady, reminding us that humanity has always lived in dialogue with the earth, adapting, surviving, and imagining